Set up your firearm for what is called a mechanical zero so you can start the process to zero your firearm. Now this is my Stag Arms Model 2 5.56 AR rig. Now there's a lot of companies that make similar firearms, but the characteristics are basically the same. So let's just go over a quick rundown of what they are. Here we have the muzzle, the barrel, and then we have the front sight, the fore ends, and then this top part here is called the upper assembly, which includes all those other items. And then we have a lower assembly, which includes our magazine well, our trigger and trigger assembly group, and then of course our grip. Then last but not least, there's the stock that has the buffer tube and buffer spring. And we'll go over some of those finer details later in another video. But what we're primarily concerned with is the front sight, which adjusts our elevation or up and down of where our rounds are going to go on the target, and then of course the rear sight back here, which will adjust the left and right or the windage of our rounds. Now let's take a look at our front sight in a little bit more detail. As we take a closer look at the front sight system, we'll see that there is a wing on the left and on the right, and in the center is a front sight post. You also notice that there is a small little circle there, and that's a detent that we're going to have to push to rotate that front sight post either up or down. Now in case you're wondering which direction to go, you'll notice that there is an arrow with the word up. That's included on most AR platform style of firearms. So what we'll have to do is get like a nail, depress that little indent, and then we can rotate that front sight either up or down one click at a time. That's something we'll do a little bit later on. Now here's the rear sight, and the rear sight is responsible for the windage or the left or right of where our rounds are going to impact the target. Now on this model it has a 6/3, so we're going to leave it in this position according to that line there with that notch. Some other AR platforms have an 8/3. Now if you're going to zero that type of platform, you're going to need to rotate this knob forward one click. Now let's get a closer look at the rear sight. Now on our rear sight we have a thing called apertures. Now this is the large aperture here, and then we also have a small aperture. Now the small aperture is used for long distance or daytime shooting. The large open aperture is used for low light conditions or when we're zeroing. We also have a knob over here that we're going to make our adjustments either left or right. Now here's the knob that we're going to use to adjust our windage or our left or right. And as you can see, there's an arrow with an R to indicate that if we rotate this in a clockwise position, one click at a time, it will adjust our windage to the right. Likewise, if we went the opposite direction and counterclockwise, that would take it to the left one click at a time. Now remember, we're going to use both the front and the rear sight and adjust those accordingly so we can put our rounds on target. So now that we've looked at the front sight system and we know that that adjusts the height or the elevation and the rear sight adjusts the left or the right of our sight, what we're going to do now is set our AR platform as what is called a mechanical zero. Now for the front sight, we're going to use a common household nail to help us adjust that front sight post. And what we want to end up doing is make sure that this front sight post area here is flush with this area here. That'll help us get our mechanical zero. Now it's a little tricky, but what you're going to have to end up doing is pressing down that little knob and then rotate that front sight towards the counterclockwise position. And keep rotating until you get it all the way up flush with this area up here. About one more turn and it should be good to go. Now to set our rear sight to a mechanical zero, there's a few things that we need to do. We won't need a nail, but we do need to look and see that there's little hash marks along this bottom edge here. And we also have one in the center. That indicates the center of the left and right windage. Now, what we'll look here on this O2 aperture, which is our largest aperture, you'll also notice that there is a little line inscribed along that aperture. What we want is that line to marry up with the center mark down here. Now, as you'll notice, it's a little bit off, so what we're going to do is adjust that knob a little bit to the right or the left so those two lines meet. That looks good about there. Now, if your AR rig doesn't have these hash marks down here on the bottom, you're going to have to go old school. Now, that means that you're going to have to take this aperture knob, the windage knob, and you're going to have to adjust it so that these apertures go all the way to the left-hand side. Then what you'll do is count the number of clicks until it goes all the way to the right side. Then you'll divide that by 2, and that'll give you your center point for your rear sight. So now that our rear sight is set to the proper position, we want to return it back to that large O2 aperture.